visual comedy, we see the same ideas crop up again and again. The wit of the comedian often lies in simply inventing new variations of old jokes. He can do this because the success of any comic idea depends not just on the skill with which it is executed, but more importantly, on the attitude with which it is performed. New attitude, new joke.
Thank you very much.
This is the first comedy ever put onto film, nearly 100 years ago in 1895. A boy stands on the gardener's hose. He lifts his foot and the gardener gets a faceful of water. It's the humiliating surprise, the basic practical joke. It doesn't come over too funny now, to be frank, because it is crude, predictable, and essentially characterless. However, if Kevin approaches the same situation of man and hosepipe with different kinds of comic attitude, we should see how it can be brought to life in different ways by introducing character into the comedy. Number 1, the dim attitude, the comedy of stupidity. The crucial element in the character of the comedian is his lack of awareness. He knows less than the audience about what is going on. The dim comedian confronts the world with a kind of bewildered innocence. Number 2, the aggressive attitude. The crucial element in the character is his lack of consideration for others.
Get a clean one. It's clean now.
Number 3, the crude attitude, the comedy of vulgarity. So which comic attitude is funniest? Probably the one you find funniest is the one with which you identify most. Only if you identify with the comic attitude can you laugh. Take Chaplin, for instance. The whole world found him funny in his day, but hardly anybody laughs at him now. Why? He is certainly far more skilled and inventive than a lot of modern comedians whom we do laugh at. He does everything it is possible to do in visual comedy, including all the things we've talked about so far. He wears comic clothes, he has a comic walk, and he is an expert in using his body. He is constantly transforming himself, turning himself into a woman, or an animal, or an object. His films are full of slapstick and acrobatic stunts. There is relentless sadism, understated violence, and overstated violence. There are surprising appearances and disappearances. There is surrealism, and there is imitation. He is an expert mime and a sharp observer of human behavior. Chaplin was also a perfectionist in the execution of his comedy, doing hundreds of takes to get things right. And yet, however much we admire him, it is hard for most of us these days to actually laugh at his films. There is often a considerable gulf between what can be described as comic and what we personally find funny. The problem with Chaplin is that it is hard for us to get involved in what he does. He is distanced from us by time and by the silence of his films. But the main difficulty, I think, is that we just can't identify with his attitude anymore. He seems too cute or too pleased with himself. Although the best physical comedians always have a strong character and attitude of their own, they also have a surprising amount in common. There are certain qualities of character which crop up again and again, because these are the qualities that make visual comedy happen. The first thing to say here is that the physical comedian is an alien. He comes from the other side of the looking glass. He is like us, but different. Whereas the verbal comedian is often smarter, sharper and faster than those around him, the physical comedian usually has a quality of innocence, of having been born yesterday. Harry Langdon is one of the weirdest of the lot. Someone once said that he looks like a baby dope fiend. He is an adult with the emotional and intellectual equipment of an infant. The comedian's childishness emerges first of all in his difficulties with objects. He is constantly doing battle with them in a way which invests them with a life and soul of their own. But there is just as much potential in very simple domestic objects. In his battles with objects, the comedian is bound to be inept. In order for funny things to happen, he must constantly make mistakes, and he must constantly be susceptible to accidents.
Throw it over your shoulder.
Although he is clumsy and inept, the physical comedian is very tenacious. He keeps on doing things long after the point where the normal person would have given up. If we take Kevin into a fashionable restaurant, the one thing he won't do is sit there and behave himself. In order to amuse, he needs to be uncivilized. He either doesn't understand social conventions, or he is incapable of following them.
Oh, Mr. Thriftwood.
Gottlieb, allow me. Mrs. Claypool, Mr. Gottlieb. Mr. Gottlieb, Mrs. Claypool. Mrs. Claypool, Mr. Gottlieb. Mr. Gottlieb, Mrs. Claypool. Mrs. Claypool, I could go on like this all night, but it's tough on my suspenders.
The physical comedian not only disregards convention, he's got little regard for morality or legality. And he has none of that consideration for others, which inhibits the rest of us from behaving like comedians all the time. Now let's see what happens if we swap it around, so that Kevin becomes the waiter and Mr. Driscoll becomes the customer. Since waiters are supposed to be polite, hard-working and competent, the comedian can't go far wrong if he is rude, lazy and useless. If he were to conform to social expectations, he wouldn't be funny anymore.